On this week's Bet the Process podcast, Rufus and I have one of our favorite guests, Kevin Clark from This Is Football podcast, formerly of The Ringer, now of Omaha and ESPN. We talk a little bit about college. Rufus gives some college football picks, some of which are even still in range, but we know about adverse selection, and we also do some survivor picks. So with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of the Bet the Process podcast. Rufus has a developed. This is our post Vegas episode, right?
This
We
is
had a
our
fun
post
time in
Vegas episode.
Vegas. It was fun.
That was one of the best Vegas weekends, I think.
I mean, we've kind of perfected the Vegas weekend, and we even had a listener show up, which was fun. Like we had everything, right?
Yeah, it was a great group. The food was great. I mean,
The
I have no
music was great.
complaints. Music was
There you
great.
go. And
Ambiance.
ambiance, whatnot. Um, you know what I discovered that I really like kind of most about those weekends is like the short amounts of downtime that I get where I can just do something, with one person that I haven't seen in a while, and it's just kind of random. We just go sit, play craps, or we go sit, have a glass of wine at La Cave or La Cave or whatever, or we hang out in
That
the
place.
room. Yeah, we hang out in the room and have some wine. Like it's all good. Um,
Have a wine tasting.
have a wine tasting. Yeah, that wine tasting was delicious.
Very well.
Shout out to Achendo Cellars, our friend Mikhail Taggart for 100-point Cab Sauv Cabernet.
Mikhail's great.
Yeah, it's great. He's the best. He actually sometimes listens to podcasts, so maybe. We have a referral code on his wines. No, we don't really, because his wines are very expensive. So for us, a referral code would be tough. What did you think of week one? You said you watched games.
Yeah,
we got to watch our Cal game come in together, which was fun.
I mean, it was on. I wasn't really watching much. Didn't they win the turnover battle like 5-0? It was kind of a
5-0.
fluky
That'll
win.
help.
It was a fluky
That
win.
certainly will help. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it was. They
No,
won 5-0, but they won outright by 7 as a 13 and a half
13.
point underdog. So
Yeah. What's each turnover worth?
I don't know. You tell me.
4 points, maybe. I don't know. This is off the top of my head.
So 20 points. So maybe it was right around what it should be. If you're still doing Massey Peabody game grades, you could probably have told us what that was, right?
Yeah, I actually did crank out game grades. I didn't post them anywhere. I might tweet them out at some point.
You should do that.
Yeah.
What did you think about the NFL? I mean, we had this whole situation that we kind of told people to bet against the rookie quarterbacks. And depending on when you got the line, it was like 1-1-1. But
Was it? Wait.
arguably felt like it should have been 3-0, right? We
Yeah.
had
It seemed
Tennessee
like the
up.
process was solid, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
Chicago won not at all because of their quarterback, and
Oh, they had two.
they
They had
scored two
essentially
special teams and defensive
yeah.
touchdowns. Like
Yeah.
that's why they won, and they were down 17 points, right?
And Denver
Seattle
won on a
Seattle looked
backdoor.
sloppy, but
Yeah.
Bo Nix looked awful. And people say that Jaden Daniels looked good, but Washington, I had them as the worst team in football going into the season, and that game wasn't particularly competitive at all. Tampa just kind of manhandled them.
Wow, you have them as the worst team, huh?
I did going into week one. Are
So
they still the worst team?
I doubt they improved it from week one, right?
No. Now Denver's the worst team.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Denver, I just have their offense is particularly offensive.
Interesting.
But it's very close.
Our survivor advice was pretty solid. I feel like we talked a little bit about not being on the Bengals and what would do if you had that chance. It's interesting. Our friend or my friend, your nemesis, Diggs, kind of
He's not my nemesis.
I'm just kidding. He'd probably be okay if I read this. I think people feel like they should play it safe in week one because if you don't, you're taking shorter faves than other week, so you lose more often. Also, always have the max number of entries you'll ever have in week one, so you have more entries get eliminated just because of that. But the Bengals also aren't favored by much at all relative to what the obvious big fave of the week normally is. It's all just more condensed.
Yeah.
Kind
I
of
mean,
an
we
interesting.
were kind of saying the same thing, right? Kind of going against, I guess, what Gil had said on his show about the time to sort of zig or zag when people are zigging isn't right at the beginning. Beal and I kind of agree.
You kind of
I think we
disagree or agree? You
no, no,
agree with
no, no,
Gil?
no. I agree. I agree with what Dig said, which is kind of what we said last week.
Yeah. How did you do in your
And,
Survivor?
and that there is more uncertainty too, right? If you have a 7 point favorite, I mean, you could argue that, and the data doesn't. There's the thing is with football, there's not that much data, so like the data doesn't necessarily show this, but I mean, I think logically it or at least show it conclusively, it makes sense that you are going to have more uncertainty around a particular point spread early in the season because we know
But
less about the teams.
but that's an interesting point, right? Because if you told someone there was more uncertainty, what they would probably lead them to is the wrong thing to do. Meaning
Well,
it
because
would
they'd say,
force
"Oh,
them.
I need to take Cincinnati then," because
Yeah.
right, but at the same time,
But you're trying to
like,
say take the more uncertainty would lead you to not take that, like to not value that -8 as
yeah.
much, right?
But again, everything depends on what other people in your contest are doing. And I saw for Circus Survivor, I think 34% of the entries took Cincinnati. I don't know what last year when we did Circus Survivor, we actually built a little prediction model for what percentage of people would take each team. And I didn't actually run it. I didn't actually enter Circus Survivor. I was thinking I was going to do it
I know
when
we
I
were
was
going to
out
do
there.
about the process one, but you were
I
just
know
too busy partying
we
and
were having
having
too much
fun.
fun.
No,
We were
I
having
get
too,
it.
well, I would have had to sacrifice Wet Republic.
I know. No one wants that, especially when Loud Luxury comes on and plays Body. It's their song. Um, did
Although I
you?
do think, Jeff, I do think I'm more of a nightclub than day club guy.
Yeah, I again like I'm my Vegas this weekend was awesome, but I also think I'm starting to value finally at age 51 different pieces of Vegas than
Well,
than running back the clubs and whatnot. But
well, the restaurants are, I think, the best part. The food and those dinners
I
and
mean,
the wine tasting.
Delilah's just insane. It's
Yeah.
so fun. It's just such a fun experience. And yeah, I feel like the Delilah Friday night dinner was my favorite moment. Just felt really good and like fun. And
Good,
I don't
clean
know.
fun.
I had a great time. Clean fun. Good clean fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I was saying that, like, I mean, I almost thought Cincinnati would come in higher, probably. And do we know what it was in our slash sports BTP Survivor,
I didn't
where both of my
I
entries
didn't look,
made it through?
but I still have 3 entries left, so I will just say that. So I'm
How
pretty
many how
happy
many
with
did you
that.
start with?
4. I lost one in the Cincinnati. I told you, like
Okay, so I like
I
this. So you had
decided when I came home from
you had four
Vegas.
entries. I have
Yeah.
2 entries. So basically, that's a nice little handicap. So I would bet straight up that on who wins between us.
You want to bet straight up right now?
Yeah, you have 3 entries. I have two. I'll take myself with two
Okay. What are
entries.
we going to bet? $1,000 for charity?
Sure.
Okay. $1,000 for charity. Who lasts longer, right? This isn't like you
So
and Shane's putting contest where only if you only win if you win, if it goes
right,
in.
this is who has the entry that lasts
Yeah.
longer.
And if we each if we bust
Dead
out
heat
on the
rules do
same
not
weekend,
apply.
if we bust out on the same weekend, we'll each donate $500 to a charity.
Perfect.
There we go. There we go. What about this week? Did you look at have you looked at all at NFL or
I did.
college or anything like that? You guys bet college? How'd you guys do in college?
We had a good week. We went, I believe, 14-9.
Oh wow, look at that.
It's a solid week.
Yeah, I bet some second halves and actually
got-
did pretty well, shockingly.
I told people, like, last year we were looking at our profit loss in the last year by sport, and last year we made $51,000 on college football, which is not a very large percentage of our earnings. And so the thought is, and I think we were down a little bit the year before that. So the question is, how much time and energy and resources should we devote to college football? But maybe it's my ego saying, like, I still think I can win, especially early week stuff. But
especially.
But someone that moved for us was like, wow, you got, like, out of the 13 plays they sent, he was like, a few days later, he's like, wow, 12 of 13 moved your way. I think you're okay. I was like, don't be so sure. That's a small sample.
Do you have anything in college? Any angles
Yeah.
we can look at? Anything?
Well,
Yeah.
we bet we bet already this week. It is interesting. I mean, last week we were talking about sort of the overreactions to the FCS games. And this week I had a bunch of numbers move quite a lot, or team ratings move quite a lot. I think Arkansas, which was kind of a bad beat push, we had Arkansas +8 last week. They lost in overtime by 8 or double overtime, but they shot up, I think, more than any other team in my ratings. And we actually did play them at -23.5 and a little -24 reduced. That line actually opened -21 at Circa. And somebody told me that Right Angle Sports liked it as well. So
Well,
maybe
that's probably
we
why
agree
it's
on
it's
something.
it's
No, I mean,
24
the
and a
thing
half.
is
It's 24 and a half now, though,
24 and a half,
Rufus.
but a lot of these lines move a lot. Like, I mean, off of the I kind of wrote down what the circuit openers were just out of curiosity to see how much they're moving. And you see some numbers that, like, I mean, okay, Minnesota went from -11, it's now -16 and a half. But with some of these, like, you get that first bet at Circa and they'll move it
No,
multiple
Rufus, it's
points.
-17 and a half, Minnesota.
Well, that's amazing because I took it at 13, 14 and a half, and 16.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
But
what's the chance that you lose that, I bet it at 17 and a half and it only loses by a point and a half. So I'll just bet it at 17 and a
50%.
half. I'm kidding, guys. You don't tail people when the stuff
Don't.
moves that much. That was a joke. I don't want people doing this, thinking that they can just take whatever Rufus says, even no
But
matter what the line is.
so I guess the question is, I was like, wow, are my numbers moving too much? It felt to me like we can move, this much on some things. And I think especially a team like maybe like Cal that already was high on relative to the market, and they had a big win, and I think you're going to see more of a reaction there. And like I was
Well,
already
what do you
high on
make
them.
that Cal line? Because that's an interesting one, right? Because even though they had that big win, we just analyzed that turnover battle and it was 5-0, which was probably, makes Cal's win seem
But
better
my
than it
rating on
really
them
is.
still improved. They were on the road.
Okay. What do you make this line against
So
San Diego
I make it
State?
-24, and we played it
Wow.
at 17 and a half and 18.
Okay. It's 19. Seems
Yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah. But I feel like given how low or given how much of an edge I showed on Cal last week, these are the ones that kind of scare me because it's like, okay, well, is is the market is moving towards me, but the fact that I was so high, like let's say, there is value to the market. And so it's almost like betting and like chasing my own steam or something, right? The market's already moved towards me and I'm still betting it at a smaller edge. But this is in this case like a pretty big edge. Do you know what I'm saying, Jeff? Though, if you've had like a big edge on some team for a while and they're doing well, and then your edge becomes like more marginal, I'm kind of like, okay, maybe this is the one that I should sort of hold off on versus if I've been against a team and then I show a marginal edge on them, those are the ones that I feel more comfortable betting.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying. Um, anything else in college?
Games I like
Sure. Might as well throw some out there.
are our
Let's see.
quote trip through college.
We used to trip through college back in the day.
Well, the trip through college is after the podcast is done recording, and Jeff asked me for the trip through the bets we've placed. But Louisiana Tech against NC State. NC State looked pretty bad. They got just blown out by Tennessee. And
Demolished.
we were watching that at Wet Republic for a little bit.
Yeah, they got
Just
demolished.
completely demolished. Grayson McCauley was the transfer from Coastal Carolina. Um, I kind of thought, he was considered I think a top quarterback. But I don't know. I mean, Tennessee just seemed like they were just manhandled them, and North Carolina State's supposed to be a decent team. So like that,
That's 21 and a half for those listening.
yeah. And that's where we got it, 21 and a half and 22. Another one, maybe this is a buy low spot, or was Michigan, although actually that looks like it's moved. So I would stay away from that at -23. But one that hasn't moved that we took, and this is maybe buying low after two like pretty poor games, very poor games, I should say. Texas Tech, they've almost lost to Abilene Christian, and then they
Mm-hmm.
played poorly last week against, who was it, Washington State, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. And yeah, we took Texas Tech at -9.5. I believe it's still there. It was this morning.
Looks
So
like it's there.
although, if the market isn't moving, if the market's disagreeing with me,
Yeah, this
just
is
take that for what it's worth. You get an adverse
classic
selection.
adverse
Just know that.
selection. We talk about this all the time. Adverse selection
Note, if I'm giving you a play that I placed and the line is still the same, that play is not as, I would
is
predict that play is
likely
not as
not as
strong. Hold on.
strong.
It's not as strong as I thought it was before I made it. Whereas
Oh,
like we
right.
played Michigan -20.5. Now it's -23. Or no, sorry, we played Michigan -22.5, not 20.5, 22.5. Now it's -23. It's likely, well, probably about as strong as I thought. Not at -23, but -22.5. But basically the ones that don't move are not as good as I thought when I placed them. And the ones that move against me, even more so.
All right. We got survivor picks. Do you want to talk all about that? Or now that we're competing, are we not allowed to talk about that?
Well, we can talk. I just might be throwing out some
Oh,
disinformation. You
some
never
red
know.
herrings. Like when someone came on our podcast and say they gave misinformation on purpose. No names to be named there.
Yep.
Oh,
I mean, the big line is what? The Ravens.
yeah. That's going to be popular. So you can't really do the Ravens because that's going to be too popular.
That's a team that's got a lot of future value too, though. Maybe Detroit. But again,
Detroit's got a
people,
lot of
I
future
wonder if
value.
people would think that, Tampa coming off of a good game. San Francisco's got a lot of future value, so you probably don't want, I mean, and they're on the road is a 6-point favorite. Kansas City, again, this is probably like -5.5, but that's, they have future value. Maybe Houston against Chicago. That
Yeah,
might
I
be
feel
fun.
like Houston against Chicago is a good one. That'll definitely be one of mine. I think the Eagles, maybe Atlanta against Atlanta might be another one because
Yeah.
Atlanta just seems like they might suck.
What's the
Given
sort of what's the really aggressive contrarian one? We have Chargers on the road against Carolina. That could be it.
how about
That's not
Jags?
super
How about the
contrarian.
Jags against the Browns? Like if they trot Deshaun out there again, are they going to win?
We're Jets against Tennessee. There's a lot of there's actually I don't think there's going to be one chalky one just because there's a lot of
It's a
games.
really fun Survivor week.
I mean, Baltimore, yeah, but aside from that, after that, there's going to be a lot, I think, of candidates.
All right,
So
I think
maybe
we
this
should.
isn't maybe this is not the week to go for that like only 2.5-point favorite or something.
Yeah,
Just given there's so many like 6-point
right.
favorites.
There's not a huge amount of people getting knocked out this week. Probably there's not one thing that's going to just kill everyone.
Right. Maybe all these 6-point favorites lose though, and then that kills everyone.
Right. Maybe
But
you
they're
should
but
money line parlay them instead. Uh, let's welcome in Kevin Clark, everyone. We'll talk to you guys all again next week, but excited to have Kevin Clark on. So let's welcome him in. Talk to you guys all again next week. We now welcome into the Bet the Process podcast one of our favorite 100 guests, Kevin Clark. So
Top
we
100.
top 100. I think we've probably had 60 guests, so that's pretty good. No, he's one
Yeah,
of our
more than
favorite
60.
guests and probably the most knowledgeable. And we've had Mina on, so like you and Mina close
No,
on the
Mina
NFL
wins. Mina
stuff.
wins.
But yeah, I mean, Mina's all over TV, all that kind of stuff. One, has anyone done any kind of trips to Springfield, Ohio for rescuing pets? Because that's kind of like what I've been trying to do is keep the pets. No one gets that joke.
I
I
get
get that
it.
joke.
I get it. I'm just
did.
not reacting to it. I'm
Okay,
just
we're not reacting to it. Okay.
I,
The first call I had this morning for work, one of the guys that works for me had a kitten sitting on his lap the whole time, and I just couldn't
Wow.
resist. Couldn't resist the whole.
The only thing I can think of is that it's funny in the Springfield sense that it just does seem like a B plot to a Simpsons episode. The whole thing does seem like something that would happen. That just the whole flare up would just be something Milhouse and Bart were dealing with for an entire episode in like a
Yeah.
1995 Glory Days episode.
Yeah. So Kevin, one year into This Is Football right now, Kevin Clark is the host of This Is Football, which is on the Omaha and ESPN networks, right? That's your deal. Formerly of The Ringer, very, very astute football guy. What 1 year into this podcast, and you have like incredible people on this podcast. The access that you get, I think, is amazing, and obviously the way that you interview them is great. So like I think that it's fitting that you would get such great guests. I guess the first question I would have is how's it going? Like how do you feel about it? Like are you like we're what is the every day do you pinch yourself that this is what your job is?
Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable. It's exceeded my expectations basically in every regard. It's been so fun because it's a little bit different than what I did at The Ringer. The Ringer had a video show called Slow News Day, but that was more about like we're just trying to be funny kind of. And if you had a football player on, you were just trying to joke around with them, which we still do. But now it's more the longer episodes. We clip stuff instead of putting the full episode and doing the quick cuts and all the stuff we did at The Ringer. They're two very different shows, so I wouldn't necessarily compare them. But the thing I found is like there's such a rich, and we called it This Is Football, and we really didn't mean for it to be as fitting as it is, but like the stories these guys have, the insights these guys have, like it's almost like a love letter to a sport, and like one of the most fun things we do, the two fun things we do, one is called Badasses, where they talk about the biggest badass they ever played with, and the other is called One Rep Back, which is you get to do a play over in your head. And what's funny about it is that you can tell that these guys have been thinking about this stuff for years. Like I asked Steve Young one play he'd like back, and he was talking about some illegal procedure penalty in a Cowboys playoff game 35 years ago. Like it's this stuff that these guys have been waiting to talk about. And that to me is like when the show is at its best is like, oh, let me tell you this story. And like, there's always going to be that kind of like, when you're doing 30 minutes with someone, there's always going to be great insight on this week's games or whatever. But the best stuff is like the evergreen. Like we have Mike McDaniel on at the owners' meetings, and I asked him about badasses, and he just like went in on Julio Jones, just could not stop talking about it. And that to me is when the sport is at its best, or the show is at its best, when it's guys who are just like excited to talk about something, because this is a type of sport we should be excited about talking about.
Do you have you learned like what is the most substantive thing you've learned about football from the podcast?
I've learned that, and this is not going to be popular. This was not going to be popular with the old version of me, certainly. People in football are a lot smarter than I used to think. And I think the biggest thing when I hear these stories or why a guy did something or the certain insights is I used to have this kind of Twitter brain where I would say, oh, this guy's not playing because the coach is an idiot. And listen, there are a lot of stupid coaches, but I think a lot of times it's, actually what you see on game day is 5% of what actually happens in an NFL facility. And the tight end who isn't playing, who's ultra athletic, he hasn't even learned the playbook, or he didn't even show up at practice on Wednesday and nobody noticed. Like that's that kind of thing. And I think the biggest thing I've noticed, and this is an overarching thing, and it goes to what I just said. Football teams are just like any other workplace. Like it's just like any other sport. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of internal politics, all of that stuff. But usually, there's usually a reason for everything. And I think that reflexively calling people stupid is something I've kind of gotten out of the more I just talk to these people and find out the rationale for this kind of stuff.
So can you settle something? This is like a very interesting theme to me because I do think like as you mentioned, the Twitter or what used to be called like Tuesday morning quarterback or Monday morning quarterback, that's a real thing. And I think the smarter you are in other things, the probably dumber you are in football from a standpoint of actually thinking you know something right? So I'm going to fall in that category because I think I'm smart, but then I have these strong opinions in football, so I'm going to call myself dumb in football because of that. I'm a Patriots fan first, Niners fan second. Kyle drives me crazy, right? Kyle's optimal decision, like everything obviously he does, he knows 1,000 times more about football than I do, but it just seems like there are some basic stuff. And even you saw it in the Super Bowl. And I now have in my head that they are never going to win a Super Bowl unless he changes the way that he approaches the game from an in-game decision-making standpoint. And Rufus will yell at me that these are just on the margin decisions. But I just think he's been there so many times and hasn't gotten there. And one of the reasons it is because he's not optimizing these micro decisions. Tell me why I'm an idiot.
But wait. Is he not optimizing the micro decisions in regular games too?
Yeah.
And because they're still winning all these games, and winning a Super Bowl requires having a good run in the postseason. Winning game, like, I'll let Kevin answer that.
All right, so we used to have this Andy Reid. We used to go in circles about this. Andy Reid was an awful game day management coach, always screwing up timeouts, always screwing up clock management, never having a sense. I mean, they didn't have a sense of urgency down one score in the Super Bowl against the Patriots 20 years ago. Like there was just no, it just never seemed like that was going to be his strength. Patrick Mahomes solves all of his problems. He's not in those kind of games anymore. He's gotten a little better at the timeout thing, and then we move on. I think that it's so, again, kind of going back to the workplace analogy, you have to be good at so many different things in coaching. You have to be able to run practice, which is something that like we don't even see, but it's a huge variance as far as who's good and who's bad at knowing when to hit in August, knowing what some of these teams that are sharp now, it's because their coach, Andy Reid, great example, Mike Tomlin, great example. They hit the crap out of each other in August and they know the exact right balance to strike. So that's a coaching thing. All of these little things as far as like how you manage workload, all of these things, those are all what I would consider game management decisions. Are you keeping a running back fresh for the fourth quarter so you can ice the game? Like there are so many things that I think go into being a smart coach. And I think we focus too much on what I consider to be the marginal decisions. Sean McVay is also, I think, a bad timeout coach. He's a bad
fourth down
management coach. Fourth down, exactly.
That's what everybody focuses on.
Exactly. And I think that we
boring.
got too in the weeds on those sort of decisions. And like, I'll give you a great example. Over the summer, I ran into like a Miami Hurricanes legend, and we were talking about how like Mario Cristobal, famously not a good game day coach, didn't take a knee against Georgia Tech, has screwed up games against Stanford, but Butch Davis, who built the best college football team of all time and left before he won Natty there, was also a terrible game day coach. And I was saying this to this legend, and he said, "Yeah." And this guy played for Butch, and he was like, "Yeah, but the thing about Butch is he knew he was a bad game day coach, so he recruited players where it would all be self-led. Like it was like guys who were just amazing, and you could just take your foot off the gas on game day and let the players go." So does that make Butch a good coach because he knew how to accentuate his strengths and say, you know what? I don't know what the hell is going on, but I'll get Ed Reed back there, and he's going to play safety, and he'll be my defensive coordinator. I'll get Ken Dorsey to be and Frank Gore to be my offensive coordinators or whatever the hell, and they'll figure it out. Like, I think that there's ways. I think we look at a handful of high leverage decisions or whatever, and we say this is a good coach on game day, this is a bad coach on game day. I think there's so many different routes to being a good game day coach, and I think that it's almost impossible to comprehend. It's like those TikToks I watch where it's like there's like 60 billion trillion galaxies or whatever. Like the amount of edges you need to win a football game is incalculable. And even if you have the amount, we had this play, but we stepped out of bounds. Like it is incalculable. And what's funny to me is I actually just talked about this with someone yesterday. I said, are week one games random? Like, how do you consider? It's someone who's a executive of the team, and I said, I have a hard time whenever I think about how many edges you have to win a football game. I have a hard time thinking it's not random. And this person said to me, the way I've come to reckon with it is that I think I love the phrase. He said, outcomes are random, results are not. And I think what he meant by that was, and this is what he said. He said, if the Chiefs have a 52% advantage on every single play, eventually over time they're going to win. And you almost look at it like at bats, where like you've leveraged offense against defense in a way where you have the advantage. You're up 3-1 in the count over and over and over again, and eventually you're going to win the Super Bowl. And so that's kind of how I look at it. But I think calculating those odds are it's impossible, and you have to have a level of understanding in football that is probably unknowable.
So
It's interesting.
I'm
I
just
mean-
never going to agree. I'll let you say it, but I'm just never going to agree with this in terms of I think some of these things are just so in plain sight that they are silly not to be better at, right?
Yes,
like
but-
he's good at the much harder things than some of these very what we know are analytically sound decisions, like i.e. the shitty punting decisions and like 4th and 1 at the 3-yard line up by 13 and you kick a field goal. Like what are we even doing? And like maybe Trent Williams was like kind of hurt and he had to shuttle him out and he's worried, but like, you know what? Like, I don't know. You gotta set the tone, and that tone at that point is like, let's make optimal decisions, because that's to me a very unoptimal decision.
But Jeff, I mean, again, like you're looking at like 3% of what coaching is, and
I'm not saying he's a bad coach because
I know you're
I'm
not.
I'm saying like he's a net amazing coach, right? But this seems like one that like over time you would just and yeah, like to your point about Butch Davis, it's like, yeah, I think that makes him a great coach, is understanding your weaknesses and delegating and figuring out how you supplement that. And that's the point of Kyle. Kyle could hire someone that helps him run these numbers, and during game day is in his ear. And I know he has people, right? He just doesn't listen to them. I mean, that's a very strong, smart front office in terms of analytics. It's one of the first NFL teams that was really looking at analytics in any meaningful way, but yet that's not transferring to our on-field decisions. And I don't know, it drives me crazy.
I think the biggest thing, and even though Kyle is a young coach, even though Sean McVay is a young coach, they still started in the game when analytics weren't even a buzzword. I mean, Kyle Shanahan started, Sean McVay started under John Gruden. Like Mike McDaniel, for all of his whiz kid stuff, started, I would say the analytics era started around 2012. And these guys were already in the league for 4 or 5 years by then. Matt LaFleur, same deal. Or they came in through college where there are no analytics. There's nothing because there's no data, especially if you're Matt LaFleur and you came through the MAC and your dad was a MAC assistant. You don't have that stuff. And so that generation is more old school than we give it credit for. I'm curious to see, Jeff, what happens with the next generation, the guys who are coming in now, who are going to get head coaching jobs in 7 years. What happens? Because for me, it's funny. I always viewed it as, so there's a bunch of salary cap guys who became GMs, and Mike Tannenbaum is one, Howie Roseman, and the reason is because in 1993, salary cap comes in. Nobody knows what the hell's going on. The GMs have to hire a salary cap guy. So all these guys get their foot in the door in the mid 90s. They rise up. They become GMs in 2005 to 2022. The era is kind of over now where cap guys are getting jobs. But now what's happening, the only way to get your foot in the door is analytics. So at some point, there will be true analytics franchises. And we haven't really seen it. Maybe we thought that was going to happen with the Vikings. They haven't really done it just yet. But the analytics guys are getting in the door in the last decade, and then they're becoming GMs now. They're going to become GMs more over the next 5 years. And then we're going to see what happens when a team, Jeff, decides to just stop punting. When a team decides to just make those optimal decisions, if it actually matters. I think we're going to enter a golden age of getting to see some of these things in practice.
But so to your point though about these other things matter, how you run practice, when you hit, I feel like the analytics on that probably have a much more, like much bigger bearing on what happens on the field overall. Yeah. And we're not seeing it, but I mean, think about Chip Kelly and what he was trying to do with tracking players' sleep and all that. He was kind of, for all the things he did poorly, he was kind of ahead of his time on sort of using data on the sort of injury front. And so, 100%. I mean, and looking at week one and, all the injuries some of these teams had, I mean, the Rams lost a bunch of offensive linemen. They were down to the third string left tackle or something like that. And especially teams where they hadn't played guys in the preseason, it's like, how much of that is predictable? Like, are you more likely to get injured in that case versus getting knocked out of a preseason game? versus getting injured in practice. I wonder, like, do organizations, such as the Chiefs, have data on this? Are they making decisions like that based on sort of Andy Reid's gut instinct, or based on some sort of internal data they have?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that there are numbers where you mentioned the Chip Kelly thing. I remember stories about how literally they would stop you at the door sometimes and be like, "You've worked too hard this week and you're not practicing on Friday. Go inside, go in the cold tub." And so we've seen that before. Um, I think it's, and also it's going to be, you mentioned like the intersection between the science and the gut thing. It's also like, hey, the running backs coach noticed that this guy just isn't cutting sharply at all today. He's probably a little tired, and then maybe that doesn't show up on the data. And so there's always going to be a gut element to it, always. And Jeff, you mentioned maybe sometimes Kyle leans into it too much with, oh, Trent Williams is banged up. We're going to make the decision based on it. But there's always going to be that part of it. But I think the more data you have, I mean, you see it all the time with, and I don't know if I told the story here before, but like you can see now GPS data how fast a receiver is year over year. How we used to say, oh, he lost a step. Now we can go, oh, he literally lost a step. Like we can see that in the data here. And so I think it's going to be just a fascinating kind of next few years as far as what changes and what doesn't, and who gets put in power once we have all this information.
Well, with how much data there is, your typical analytics person, I guess, or you need a real data science person, like someone, I mean, just because there is such a massive quantity of data, not just someone that did some data science boot camp or something, right? I mean, I think that it's, and like, I don't feel like I would be qualified to.
Have I ever told you my Titan story?
No.
So this is 2017, and I'd been lucky enough. A couple of teams had let me see their analytics department, when in some cases their analytics data, like their draft boards. And the deal was couldn't take any notes, couldn't take any photos. They just wanted me to see what they were doing, what it looked like. And a lot of it was totally out of context so that I couldn't do anything with it. It was like there'd be little numbers in a bar and it would be like, accuracy rating. Well, I don't know the ingredients of accuracy rating. So what the hell am I going to do with it? I'm going to go, ooh, this team has I'm going to go to some other place else and go, this team has an accuracy rating. Well, if you don't know the formula, it doesn't matter. So I go to Tennessee on the camp tour, and I'm with John Robinson, the GM at the time. And he's, I think he's okay at his job, but he was almost proud of this, where I said, hey, do you have an analytics department? He goes, oh, yeah, I have an analytics department. And I go, okay, can I see it? And he goes, yeah, you can see it. I said, okay. And he goes, you're looking at it. And then he was basically laughing like, I'm the analytics department. I don't do any analytics. Like, I'm making fun of it. And then like 3 years later, he's out of a job. He took all of these guys, I think in the first round, who didn't have any testing data and all that stuff. And so it's just funny how now I don't think you have the option to even joke about not doing that. Everybody has one or two analytics people in their front office. And if the GM even made that comment, even in jest, I think his owner would say, what the hell are you doing? And I think that's kind of what's changed so far. And you're seeing real deal data science people. I think the biggest thing now, as you mentioned, like the data boot camp or whatever, I think in the past, there were some people who were like, oh, we're gonna just assign our national scout like 2 data science people under him, and it's just not going to work. And I think when you see an entire department, like I think Howie Roseman's crew has been criticized. I think they call it like a black box where no one knows what they're working on. Like they're always doing things. That's actually the way to do it, is just have this crew that is separate, and then they come to Howie with information, and then Howie decides how to use it all. I think that's probably the future.
Well, I mean, I think what you said around an organizational philosophy, because I think that's the future, right? Ultimately, I disagree with you guys on saying like you need better data scientists and things like that. What you need is a better organizational approach, right, where you're looking for edges at all points. And then again, like I'm a annoying broken record on this Kyle thing, but that's kind of what drives me crazy. Like the 49ers have more smart data science people, it's like analytical people than anyone. You can see it because of the people that end up hired out of that organization, right? Like that there are people there they're just either not being listened to or not given the voice on these very simple things. And even when you talk about organizational philosophy, I mean, what we've talked about with baseball this year, where so much of like even the Red Sox who've had like some level of success, it's because they've had this organizational approach where they're trying to use training and other things, analytics around training, like with Kyle Bodie and drive line and those types of things. Like I think that idea of where are the injury prevention and player improvement and like these are all things where you really start trying to find the edges everywhere. Like it's kind of like a lazy thing to be like, oh, well, he's good at everything else, so it's fine if he's shitty at this one thing. It's like, I don't know, like why would you want to be a shitty at one thing on purpose? Anyways, I'll stop. And we can move on.
Yeah.
I want to follow up. Whose job is it to tell Kyle Shanahan to get better at these decisions? Does Jed York say it? Does John Lynch say it? And if he says, I don't want to do this, I don't want to have if John Lynch and and Jed York came to Kyle Shanahan and said, we want the timeout coach to actually be able to have final say on this, and Kyle says, no way, who do you defer to in that situation if you're Jed York?
I think you have to defer to Kyle because
That's
otherwise you're undermining his authority.
Right,
That's the whole point. So it's more on Kyle than it is on the organization.
To say get better at this one thing, like I'm trying to think of like a huge flaw I have. I'll tell you, I'm awful at like administrative stuff. I never like get my expenses in on time. I never fill out my forms. I think there was a couple months at the Ringer I didn't have health insurance. Like I'm awful at like just doing things that aren't like the fun stuff, right?
Adulting.
And,
I'm so bad at it too.
If someone came to me and was like, you have to get better at this or we're going to fire you, I'd probably be like, yeah, I'm not going to get better at this. Like, I just know myself well enough. And maybe that, like, what if that's just Kyle's nature to be a conservative coach along with everything else, Jeff?
The reason you're not better at it is you don't think it ultimately drives the success of how you are as a podcaster.
Kyle probably doesn't think that either.
Right.
So, because it is such a small percentage, but it's what you see, Jeff, and what you harp on. And I don't want you to harp on it anymore because
I'm not going to harp on it, but I do think this is an interesting thing around like influence, right? Because I think like the job is not for Jed York and Lynch to go to him and say, you need to change or we're going to fire you. The job is for someone to try to get through to him from a standpoint of understanding approach and process, right? Mm-hmm. And it isn't that one decision always. It's the decisions that lead up to it. It's the what do you call on third down, knowing that you can go for it on fourth down, versus and that frees you and those edges become bigger. Anyways, okay, let's move on. Week 1, we got some shticks here. What do you consider this podcast? In case you forgot, it's called Bet the Process. So, what do you consider to be the most improved process of any team from what you saw in week 1?
So this is an odd one, and maybe this is not in the spirit of the question, but I think it is.
It's just like the debates yesterday. You don't actually need to answer the question. You just come up with whatever soundbite you want.
Don't real time fact check me. I think it's the Bears, and I'm going to tell you why. I think a lot of teams have this Mahomesian fantasy that a quarterback's going to come in and change everything. And they tried that with Justin Fields, and it didn't work. And he never had the weapons, and he didn't save them, and he never made the team any better. And what I saw on Sunday, and I know the Levis interception obviously was such a high leverage play that it swung the game.
And don't forget the block punt.
The block punt, right.
Those of us on Tennessee +4 are not going to ever forget any of this. So.
I didn't have that, but I have a lot on Bears under 8.5 season wins.
The defense was making plays. The weapons are better. And they won a game with Caleb Williams being awful. And I do think there's a something to be said for him getting all the advantage now. The interior offensive line is still a work in progress. Jeffrey Simmons made his life hell. But I think there's something to be said for giving Caleb Williams all of the advantages that Justin Fields never had. And saying, and my biggest thing, guys, is no one wins the Super Bowl because they drafted an elite quarterback. Because if that were the case, Justin Herbert would have a ring by now. They win the Super Bowl because they figure out what to do with the elite quarterback. And if Caleb Williams hits, the Bears will be ready, which I don't think you can say for a lot of these teams just starting out here. Like, if Jaden Daniels is the deep passer he was at LSU year 1, I think there's a real ceiling on this team, on the Commanders. Patriots, I think, need better weapons on the offensive side of the ball if Drake May's any good when he takes over. So And I'm going to get to some of those other teams a little bit later, but like, I think what the Bears did in placing Caleb almost last in the team building process. Now it's sort of an accident, but I do think that it shows that Ryan Poles kind of knows what he's doing.
Okay. How
Kind of what
sorry.
the Browns were trying to do for a long time, right? Get everything in place and then get the right quarterback. But
Oops.
Yeah. They did the opposite of getting the right quarterback.
I said this on my show on Sunday. Like, whoever made the decision in Cleveland, whoever it might be, and only they know, whoever made the decision should
never
be
analyze
allowed-
football again, right?
should never be able to make a decision again. So if it's the owner, just send him away to Florida and be like, you're never allowed in the facility again. If it's I love Andrew Berry. As a GM, I think he's a nice guy. If he made the decision, I don't know. I've never seen any reporting on this. If he made the decision to trade for Deshaun Watson, he should not be the GM anymore. But I would, in these situations with that kind of contract that kind of breaks precedent, my leaning is that it was probably ownership. And I think that Jimmy Haslam should, if that's the case, should retire from ever talking football ever again.
Wait, so we know, I mean, the contract was bad in PR wise because of all the off-field stuff, all the sexual assaults, etc. But did we
Alleged.
Okay, fine.
Don't want to get sued by Deshaun Watson's people. I've heard he's one of the 7.
So the question is though, like, did anybody expect he would be this bad on the field?
So the phrase I used the day it happened was reckless. This was a reckless trade because it was funny. I was talking to a GM on Terry Fontenot, actually, the Falcons GM, a couple of months ago, and this is separate. And we were talking about busts. I said, like, what are the busts you wish you could take back? And he said every bust he's ever had in his career, with very few exceptions, mostly being injury, was we got the person wrong, not the player. And that always reveals itself. So if you're trading for Deshaun Watson, you already know the person is not there. There was a very funny, not to make light of this, I don't know if you guys saw the Pardon My Take clip the other day, where Big Cat asked, kind of tongue in cheek, if Deshaun is now a better person than football player because he's so bad at football. The cliche, oh, he's a better, but but you already know you're bringing on a guy who does not pass the character test. He had not played in a long time. You have no evidence. He had not really played in a meaningful game in a long time. That Texans team was just out to lunch for a while. And I don't think anyone thought. I was actually in West Virginia to meet up with those guys to go to a Browns practice a couple weeks ago. And there was someone there who said that the issue with Deshaun, I said this on my show, but the issue with Deshaun is that his best throws, and I haven't seen this, but this is what this guy knows more than me. He works the team. His best throws are as good as they were in Houston. The problem is he throws this incredible, like, bottom 10% of throws are just this category of throws that have never existed for him at college or pro. He just throws absolute, like, stinkers, and they have no idea where that came from. Now, is that from lack of, maybe he watches less tape in Cleveland? Is that from lack of focus? Is that from lack of training? Is he hurt? Is he hurt and doesn't want to rehab as much as he used to? There's just so many different things that go into it. I think being an elite quarterback is more of a temporary thing than we think. And I don't think anybody thought he'd be this bad, but I was not expecting, to give the biggest contract in history, first guaranteed contract to go over $100 million in history, because Kirk Cousins was $83 million, to give that much money to a guy who had just been, what was it? I forget the terminology. He had just been, the DA didn't charge him or whatever, right? And he settled the lawsuits. To go from that to getting the biggest contract in history shows you something was broken and something was, and it was both player and team.
Well, and you mentioned the person thing, but being a quarterback, you're sort of de facto the leader of the team, or a leader of the team in the locker room. And imagine how does that go over when, Like, how are you expected to lead people when
Yeah.
there's probably players in the locker room that probably don't have a lot of respect for you as a person?
Well, I wouldn't begin to know what the interpersonal politics are there, but what I'll say is this: so much of being a quarterback or any leader is telling these guys to get back on track and telling them and saying, "Hey, man, like, hey, did you really go out before our Thursday practice? You know Thursdays are install day, and you're sweating bullets out there. You look like shit. Like, come on, man. Let's you're getting sloppy." And so like that, there's so much of that. It's kind of what we're talking about the Butch Davis thing. The players police themselves. Like as much as we say um that these coaches set the tone or whatever, like Levitard used to make fun of this all the time. Like everybody's, oh, the team takes on their coach's personality. You think the 2009 Magic took on Stan Van Gundy's personality? Like, you think Eric Spoelstra's personality is rubbing off on the Heat? No. Like, it's the players. It's Udonis Haslem. It's Rashard Lewis. It's whomever, right? They're the ones who are telling these guys how to be professionals and all that stuff. And so, if he's the de facto leader of the team, on what grounds does he tell anybody to get back on track? Because you lose your authority immediately. I completely agree with you.
Okay, next question. Worst
Yes.
process you saw in week 1.
So I'm not gonna make fun of the Giants here. I'm just not. Um I think that um they tried to replace Daniel Jones, and actually they went out of their way to not make the Daniel Jones mistake of trading for some guy, whatever. They got Drew Lock, tried to figure it out in the draft. They didn't reach for Michael Penix. That would have been a disaster. So the Giants are awful, but I thought about them for worst process and I talked myself out of it. The one I am going with is this worst process overall or worst process despite outcome?
Was this worst process overall?
Okay, great. The Atlanta Falcons. Um, Kirk Cousins does no play action. He does everything out of pistol or shotgun. I believe I saw a stat that he's like been in pistol almost never in his career. What was the point of signing Kirk Cousins if he wouldn't be so if you're and also if you're worried about his health? Why was he out there? You took a first round pick 6 months ago. If you're worried about his health, you don't want him on the move. You signed Kirk Cousins for play action, putting him on the move in the pocket. He didn't do any of that stuff yesterday. You play called like he was a different quarterback. On top of that, it looks like you have two different front offices because one of them is trying to maximize the roster this year. One of them is trying to win with the quarterback in 2026. And that never works. It looks like there's two opposite sides of the building and they've never talked to each other. And everybody thought that Kyle Pitts and Drake London and all these guys in that offensive line were going to set sail with Kirk Cousins. And it hasn't happened yet for a bunch of different reasons. But once the Michael Penix thing happens, I joked on TV a couple weeks ago. It's like they went from no credibility at the quarterback position to literally too much credibility. And that's as big a problem. And Kirk Cousins has no equity in that town. He's playing poorly now. When they drafted Michael Penix, he'd never met most of his teammates. So they don't have any loyalty to him. So he's playing poorly in a town that does not care about him. And I think you're going to get into a very, very, very fraught, toxic situation very soon. And if he's not healthy enough to be good, it's only going to get worse.
All right, we'll give you another one of these and then maybe the last one and get you out of here.
Wait, I have questions too, Jeff.
All right.
Wow.
Rufus, you don't have to answer these. You can speak up. Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to say, is there anything to some teams year after year starting slow or fast? It feels like the Bengals, every year, the last few, maybe this is just my bad memory, but have started the seasons like off slowly. Is that? Yeah.
So we talked about it.
It's the not seeing things, right?
Yeah. The Burrow is such a rhythm and feel player, like a point guard. That I do feel like there's a little bit of rust, but I'm extremely concerned about Joe Burrow's health. I'm extremely concerned about that franchise because T. Higgins isn't playing. Jamar Chase feels like he doesn't want to play, but still does. I'm a big believer in ownership mattering a lot, and it rearing bad ownership rearing its head at the worst times. It's why teams don't like. What do you guys think The Last Dance was about? It was about, I mean, everybody thinks about Jerry Krause, but Jerry Reinsdorf being like, this is pretty expensive. What if we just started to retool? And you always have to watch out for that. But to answer your question about the slow start, fast start, I think some of it's more by choice than you think. I think that the best teams, like Jeff, think about how often the Patriots used to use September to experiment and
Yeah.
to fuck around with the offensive line or whatever. And like I had Mitch Schwartz on my podcast last year, and we were talking about how much better the Chiefs have gotten and how they would basically play with their food. And he said that 2013, maybe one of those years, that Andy like just decided to just commit to the deep passing game, learn that identity, and they lost games not early, but in the midseason, because they were like, let's build this deep passing game. And if we lose a game to the damn Raiders that drops us to 7-3, so be it. But we're trying to figure out the identity of our team, and that's more important than whether or not we win this game. So a little bit with the Bills, I think, too, where they were just trying to figure out their offensive identity last year. But I think some of it is teams understanding you can't get enough work done in August, so it bleeds into September. And I think there's some teams that are genuinely terrible, but I also think there's some teams that if you've trusted them before, I wouldn't worry about trusting them now.
So I've always thought that sort of the scheme-based coaches, the sort of offensive masterminds have an edge early in the season because they're throwing out novel things that their opposition hasn't scouted yet. And so then later in the season, they put all that on tape. They, teams copy, et cetera. Do you believe that at all? Is there any merit?
The scheme lords, I'd actually say the defensive scheme lords have a really good edge because showing if you're a defense and you show anything complicated to an offense, it's like loud noises in the morning after a hangover. Just like I don't want to see this, man. I don't want to see this blitz. I don't know what the hell this safety's doing. Just give me something, okay? Give me something else. And I think throwing a lot at a team, offensively or defensively, can really just annoy the other team, which is what you want to do this time of year. I would go to last year, and this is what I was laughing about this year, where people were like, "Oh, this team looks terrible in preseason." Well, guess what? Mike McDaniel with his orbit motions and cheat motions and CFL shit last year literally changed offensive football, and no one talked about it until that Chargers game. He didn't show it in the preseason. They didn't report on it in practice. He just showed up and punched them in the freaking mouth. And that's the kind of stuff, if you have it, you just unfurl it in September and no one knows what the hell to do with it. You're trying to figure out your identity. You're trying to figure out your best 5 defensive backs. You're trying to get away with something with a linebacker. And all of a sudden, Mike McDaniel's got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill doing something you've never seen before in American football. That, to me, is where, and you saw this a little bit, actually, going back to the 2013 Chiefs when they played that game. Was it 2016? 2016. It was the Alex Smith last year where they beat the Patriots, I think, in September. They just started this deep passing that Alex Smith had never put on tape before. And they had Tyreek Hill, and they were just busting the Patriots' ass. And I think if you can do something early in the season when a team is flat-footed on offense or defense, that they've never seen before, that they're not prepped for, there is a sense of panic because you are not supposed to be this good this early, and scheme can help bridge that gap.
Let's say you do have something like that. I've always wondered, are you better off, showing that week one and winning a few games that way? Or if you're like a team that like the Patriots back when they were good, the Chiefs, are you
1-0, baby, 1-0.
Are you better waiting, almost like waiting till the playoffs or till a high leverage moment there where it can actually have you? I guess where's
yeah. So there was something kind of funny. I watched. It depends what kind of team you are and what your goals are. I watched film years ago with Chris Collinsworth at his house, and he talked about how Brady and Gronk, and by extension, I assume Belichick, McDaniels, were incredibly good at cashing in at the exact right time on a concept or a play. And they were saying basically that like Gronk would be open on a concept like 8 times, or he'd be uncovered or whatever, and they would purposely not throw it to him, not show it, or he'd run he could have had 50 yards if he just run left, he'd run right. They would do that first quarter, second quarter, third quarter because they knew the linebacker either wasn't covering him in this concept or wasn't fast enough to cover him in this or in the with the talent or whatever. And then when they were down 4 with 8 minutes to go, boom, you hit Gronk. And what Collinsworth said, and I don't have any examples of this, is that they would do that with schemes too, like schemes from one game to the next. Is they would show something on tape every single time, knowing that someone else is watching. Jeff is so excited about these old school Patriot stories, knowing that someone's watching and saying, okay, well, Gronk's never done this, never done this, never done this. Oh, it's a Super Bowl. Guess what? Gronk did it. And part of that is the chemistry between quarterback and tight end. And you see this a lot with Kelsey and Mahomes, where like they don't even run plays anymore. They just play basketball and Kelsey just sits in the zone and grabs it. And so there's an advantage there. But I think the smartest teams whose goal is to win the Super Bowl wait to cash in at that point. Like I saw a thing, Nick Foles was talking about this last week when he retired, that they almost ran the Philly special up big in the NFC title game and then decided not to put it on tape then because we're like, we're up, we're going to win this game no matter what. It was in the game plan for that game. They decided to hold it and then they won the Super Bowl because of it. But like, that's a good example of like, I don't want to put the Philly special on tape. The Patriots are going to plan for it. You'd have to run, what you'd have to do if you run the Philly special against Minnesota is run some tag where you start to run it and then you do something different. Well, it's not as good a play. So you have the play and you wait until the exact right time to cash in. I think that's what the great teams do.
Anything else, Rufus? I was just excited because it reminded me of that joke where they always used to say like the Chiefs would run the good plays or the bad plays. Like the Chiefs run the bad playbook for this game or the good playbook for the other game. So anything else, Rufus, or should we let him go?
No, do you have anything, Jeff?
I mean, I have plenty, but we're at time and we gotta be respectful of one of our top most 100
top
famous
100,
guests. So
top
yeah,
100.
so there you go. So
You don't get
Kevin,
top
thank
100. You don't get top 100 every day. So I'm thrilled.
Kevin,
Not
thank you
everybody
so much
gets
for
top 100.
joining us. Always great to talk to you.
Thanks guys. Let's hit the link soon.
Yep.